What Canada has done is they've basically opened themselves up to mass immigration. And the reason they've done it, in my opinion, is very similar to the reason Australia has done it, and very similar to the reason why the US has done it. And that is to create an illusion of economic growth that isn't real.
Before we start, we need to tell you up front we are not a licensed financial planning, accounting or law firm. This is simply an education program which will give you factual information. We do not give any general or specific advice around finance, business, investing, options trading or anything else. That is not what this presentation does. Please see a licensed financial planner when it comes to any investment advice you need.
Edge Radio Australia, time for the Greater Wealth. Very excited about today's program because, mate, it is always a pleasure to sit here beside you and feed off your incredible insight about the collision between politics and, of course, the finance world. We've got a couple of great videos here we're going to be talking about today. We also may have a guest with Shaquille might join us, which is something that's always a lot of fun. Do you want to give us a rundown about a couple of things we might be talking about today?
Look, I think we'll hit the ground running. There's still so much going on, and people and the international leaders trying to assess what it's going to mean when 47 gets into the power there.
That's going to change things just a tad
in the US. So we'll have a look a little bit about that a bit deeper. Right. We've got our Australian Prime Minister. He's got a reason why Australians are finding it tougher in 2024.
Tougher. We're a lot poorer in 2024. That's the real.
That's what the headlines are saying.
Oh, right. There you go.
Yeah, I was trying to be neutral, but you know.
I don't pretend to be in any way, shape, or form neutral. But there you go.
Well, I think that we'll get into that a little bit later. And also, there's been an interesting fire overseas, which I think never really hits the headlines, and you've got to ask, well, why is it hitting the headlines now? So we'll get into that a bit later too.
Very, very curious indeed. All right, well, let's get started. And of course, a great thing with Edge, if you want to jump online and throw through a comment or a question, do not be shy indeed. Get on board with that one. And the other thing too is a lot of people, we don't see the comments right now because we're going through so many different formats, so many different platforms. So for that reason, throw in a question and we'll be happy to talk about that later. Hopefully next week we can cover that, but we definitely love your insight on that one. So where shall we dive first, mate?
Let's start overseas because I think this is the big one with 47 coming into the power here. And it's almost like he's already in power in many regards because all the international leaders are wanting to catch up with him. Mm-hmm. They're all flying in. Even the social media giants, the Zuckerbergs of the world are flying in going, hey, we've been enemies in the past. How do we move forward here? Yes. They always talk about these conversations as being cordial. I do wonder. I wonder how fiery they might get.
Oh, they'd have to, surely. I mean, honestly, you watch someone like Zuckerberg who's been completely against Trump from the absolute beginning, completely toxic, quite frankly, steered an election. As far as I'm concerned, it was election interference, certainly in the last one that went, back in 2020, was absolutely a joke what the social media platforms did, particularly back then Twitter, before it had its new owner. So, I wonder just how cordial these conversations are.
And I am noticing the feed on Facebook changing for me. It's because stories that you would never see 2-3 years ago are popping up now. I'm going, that's interesting. They're changing the algorithm again. They're fiddling with it.
Yep.
And more of the truth is coming out, and I'm going, fascinating. Wouldn't have anything to do with the change in election, all that sort of thing.
Never.
But he's got to pivot, this billionaire, because he's basically got the one enterprise that's going for him, which is that we know of.
Oh, yeah, sure, he's got his hands in like the other pies. There's no question about that.
Well, Trump's diverse in terms of he started as real estate, but now, you go into the Trump store and you can buy everything from Trump honey to Trump slippers. He's the brand.
Oh, there's Truth Social for a start. So he's actually gone into that market as well.
Well, yes, I was just going to bring that up. He's got a competitor now. You're absolutely right. And so how do they talk in terms of that moving forward is really interesting.
I'm sure they walk in there, hold hands, sing Kumbaya. I'm sure it's just like that,
But social media aside, which you still access if you are under 16 at the moment, I have noticed that it's been very interesting to see some big players going to Mar-a-Lago or at least having phone calls with him. One of them is Trudeau. He's been over there trying to negotiate with the US president-elect and also Mexico. Now, why are these two places? Well, these two are fascinating because they're on the border of the United States, if you haven't worked it out. And, of course, America has got some problems with their border security.
Just a bit.
Which the vice president never bothered to look at in her portfolio and had 4 years to fix it.
Hey, look, remember, she hadn't been to Europe either, okay? So she didn't need to go to the border because she didn't need to go to Europe, right?
Yeah.
It's been pathetic. So it's so great to see the new guy that they've got there in charge of looking after the border. I forget his name, but my word, I'm already a fan.
Oh, boy, he's going to take a no mince policy.
Absolutely.
When it comes to sort of this. But what he's basically saying is that there'll be a 25% tariff on all products from Mexico and a 25% tariff on all products from Canada and an additional 10% tariffs on goods from China. So when you look at these tariffs, everybody's going, well, hang on a second. Can we talk about this?
Yeah. Can we
have that conversation at least? And it's a twofold sort of approach, particularly when it comes to Canada and Mexico. Mexico in particular, he's very concerned about the fentanyl and the drugs that have been coming across the border and going, you got to do something about this. Now, the Mexican president has come out and had some responses to that. We've got some footage. Apologies that it's all in Spanish. There's not an interpreter for those just in audio only talking over this, but it will certainly, if you are into subtitles, you'll understand what's going on.
Now, great to see you, of course. Shaq has joined us on the feed, mate. Great to see you, buddy. We'll go to this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and Derek's after we watch this video.
Y así, hasta que pongamos en riesgo empresas comunes. Sí, comunes. Por ejemplo, de los principales exportadores de México a Estados Unidos son General Motors, Stellantis y Ford Motor Company, las cuales llegaron a México hace 80 años. ¿Por qué ponerle un impuesto que las ponga en riesgo? No es aceptable y causaría a Estados Unidos y a México inflación y pérdidas de empleo. El 70% de las armas ilegales incautadas a delincuentes en México proviene de su país. Las armas no las producimos nosotros. Las drogas sintéticas no las consumimos nosotros. Los muertos por la delincuencia para responder a la demanda de drogas de su país, lamentablemente, lo ponemos nosotros.
So basically there's pushback there. She's saying that, look, this is going to hurt. Let me deal with that in a minute. Well, it's not our fault that illegal weapons are coming in. You're the ones that manufacture 70% of the weapons coming across the border. And we're not the one who is presenting a market for these drugs to come through. That's basically...
it's not our fault. Mexico is completely clear.
The other point that's being made out here is that you have US companies manufacturing in Mexico. So like the US Ford company is making the cars in Mexico. Because it's cheaper to do so, obviously. Now, these tariffs are going to cause some confusion in terms of the trade agreements between the nations that allow for that arrangement to occur. So how does that play out in relation to the tariffs for Ford Motor Company? Our car's going to get more expensive. This is really interesting what they're pushing back. Canada, Trudeau, less transparent. It's more, everything's going well. We've had some, every time there's a shift of power and you're just hearing the diplomatic response. You're not really getting any detail. But there was also some tweets. Trump put out a post saying, look, solved. They're going to close the border in Mexico. This is just around Thanksgiving that he puts this out. And then the Mexican president comes out with a tweet and says, if you still call them tweets on X, no, that's not the case. So
stood up to that.
She's had the last say on it. But it's interesting to come back and hear a Mexican president come out and say, no, we didn't actually say or agree to that. And she's disagreeing with him. So it's fascinating how social media is integrating here with diplomacy.
Such a crossover there. Look, the man who is all over it and absolutely loves tariffs, that of course would be Shaquille. Mate, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I have some concerns, but I think, this puts it's an interesting situation because it goes against economic theory for the last centre-right economic theory from for the last sort of 50 years or so, especially from people like Milton Friedman. One of the issues with tariffs is if they're being used to protect an industry, the question is, well, why should that industry be protected if the goods can be produced somewhere else cheaper? Shouldn't people be free to buy those goods from wherever they can get it the cheapest? Now, the risk, of course, the risk of that, of course, is that there's job losses in that sector. Now, my feeling on this is that international trade is a good thing, but it has to be two-way. It has to be reasonably equal. You can't have massive trade imbalances. Okay. So that sort of leaves a bit of a precarious answer. I think I would be in support of tariffs against countries where the labour being used is not of the same standard as what is being demanded of our manufacturers here. So, for example, we hear rumours about child labour.
Yep.
We hear rumours of unsafe work practices, things like that. Well, we shouldn't allow countries who have rules that allow for that to be able to undercut manufacturers here who do have to comply with those rules. However, if if a similar country can produce something cheaper than we can, if New Zealand if New Zealand labour was cheaper than Australian labour on a certain item, okay, fine, let them manufacture that item, we'll buy it from them, but we'll sell them something else. So I think that the tariffs with Mexico, some of that is actually about immigration. I don't think that he's going to keep that there forever. Some of it's about immigration. Some of it, he doesn't recognise that some things can't reasonably be produced in the US. But if the tariffs come with an income tax cut, hey, maybe that's not such a bad idea. She also talked about that the president there talked about guns coming into Mexico. Look, she is right. The stats do show that drugs come across the southern border into America from Mexico, and guns come across that border from the US to Mexico. So she does have a point, and perhaps America needs to be looking into that and trying to curb the gun sales going across the border. But fentanyl certainly has been an issue. I just want to make note of something that she said there. She said, we don't use synthetic drugs here. I just found that quite an interesting way of framing it. So, okay, you don't use the synthetic stuff. You guys use the good stuff. Is that the organic cocaine? Is that what you guys are doing? Like, I just found that to be a funny way of wording it. But look, I think that Donald Trump and other Western countries do have to do something about international trade, because we can't keep losing manufacturing and other jobs to places who aren't abiding by the same rules. I think if it's just a wage thing, fair enough, right? If something else can be produced cheaper somewhere else, great, we'll work on things that are more productive. But where's the sense, I always talk about this, where is the sense in taking iron ore out of Western Australia, shipping it overseas, getting it turned into steel, which is where the value add is, and then buying it back? We should manufacture it here. And then all the climate crazies will go, oh, yeah, but climate change. Yeah, but it's that carbon emissions and all that is going to happen somewhere else anyway. What's the difference?
No, there's a wall. Don't you understand? There's a big wall around Australia. And we don't get any of the nasty stuff. No. It doesn't fly around the world. We don't have winds that carry this sort of thing. It's just the climate crazies, and I am so sick and tired.
It's a bit like COVID. COVID was going to affect everybody except for the BLM protesters in inner city Melbourne.
That's right. No, look, it is just ludicrous. And when we see the emissions put out via, China and India, okay, and they're, two countries that are trying to build themselves up and push as many people in the middle class. And there's a lot of positives about that, right? But yeah, you're right. They're not playing by the same rules. If you look at what China's doing with lithium, or what they're doing with the components and the minerals for these new magnets that are being used in everything, there's a lot of this going on. They're not playing by the same rules. And all you're doing is you're virtue signaling, and you're farming off the emissions to another country, and it's going to float around in those winds. So when I hear the term climate change, it's just called weather. It's been part of the world for a very, very long time. It's called weather. There is no such thing as climate change. We had, I'm old enough to remember. Gee, how many nuclear winters have I lived through? First we're going to have an ice age, then we're going to have a heat. Oh, the ozone layer. Then we changed the aerosol cans, right? So now the ozone layer's fixed itself with because it fixed itself with taxes. It's very important. This is how these things are done. Yeah.
And it's going to England with the milk supply.
Oh,
that's what they're attacking now.
Crazy.
They're putting additives in there, and it's not. It's actually their claims that it's poison going into.
No
the milk.
way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what we see. Sorry, I thought you'd finished. Sorry, Eric.
All good.
So what we see is just a nonsense of stuff which we're forced to put up with. Mm-hmm. We all agree, I think, that if we can create energy in a sustainable and clean way, then hey, let's do that, right? But we have to be practical. So when it's possible, great. I mean, they've got wind farms down in Albany, which produces something like 80% of the power, from what I understand. Now, if that is true, that it produces 80% of the power that Albany uses, cool, great, awesome, that works. But you're not going to put that, somewhere else where it's not likely to work, right? Let's be realistic about things. So I think there's a whole heap of different ways of tackling this, and geothermal, hydropower, and nuclear power are great options. I just want to talk about the UK for a moment. So one of the things that they've talked about is biofuels. Right. So what they did in the US was they started cutting down, forests. They started clearing forests that were, hundreds of years old because, hey, it's renewable because you can plant the trees again, right? So the UK, I mean, Nigel Farage must be just tearing his hair out, what's left of it. The UK, there was a report that came out a handful of months ago that the UK was planning on buying biofuels, which was wood, that they were going to burn. And guess where they were going to get some of the wood from? North Korea and Russia. Now, if I just leave aside the geopolitical issues there, you're going to presumably you're going to put it on a train or you're going to ship it. So you're going to ship wood from, the other side of the world to your country and then burn it.
Yeah.
Great work for the environment. That's so wonderful.
Genius. Absolutely genius. Yeah. Look, I saw on the wood front, I mean, I saw this in the furniture industry many, many years ago, where they're just exporting beautiful Mary and Jarrah here from Western Australia, sending it to China, making furniture, and then sending it straight back. Right. And all it did is it was to hit a particular price point. It actually destroyed an industry here, lost so many jobs. Also that, they could hit that magic marker. And I just don't see how it's financially viable. Clearly, they made it. Now, that's probably 20 years ago. The market has changed now and the cost of things has gone up. And China, but manufacturing in China specifically, is not the bargain that it used to be.
Well, Trump's wanting to put on an additional 10% tariff on goods from China. I'm interested in your thoughts on this one, the relationship with Canada, Shaq, with 25% tariff on there. Yep. You've been to Canada, you've got connections in Canada. What are your thoughts on that one?
That one surprises me a bit because unless I'm badly mistaken, the US actually exports to Canada more than they import. Right. However, the trade between Canada and the US balances out because of Canadian oil, which flows into the US, which you're not going to tariff that. I'm not really sure what's happening with that, but I think again, part of what Donald Trump's trying to do has to do with immigration. Right. The Canada has become impossible to live in for most people. Right.
Sure.
Because not only have they had a huge influx of immigrations, especially Indians, which, I'm Indian, but I don't want to go to Canada and look at myself. I want to look at Canadians, right? Good luck to those people that are trying to build a better life for themselves. That's fine.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we should have immigration, and immigration I think is an important part of our society. I don't want to take away the opportunities from other people that my family and I have enjoyed, but there has to be a limit. It has to be done right. You can't have everybody from every country come into yours. Now, what Canada has done is they've basically opened themselves up to mass immigration. Mm-hmm. And the reason they've done it, in my opinion, is very similar to the reason Australia has done it, and very similar to the reason why the US has done it. And that is to create an illusion of economic growth that isn't real.
Yep.
We have a situation where our young people are not getting married and having kids. Multitude of reasons why. We've talked about that on the shows. I'll leave that aside for a moment. We've got this situation where the economy turned down during COVID. So what the government's decided to do was to just mass import a whole heap of new immigrants.
Yeah.
Does that lead to more economic growth? Well, over time it might, but it also puts a massive strain on social services.
Of course
it puts a massive increase on housing. I would hate to be trying to rent a house now. I'd absolutely hate to be trying to do that. So that becomes unaffordable. Buying a house becomes unaffordable I'm talking about for the everyday person, right?
Yep.
Young people then can't go and get their first apartment. Young people can't go and get a summer job or a part-time job. Hey, I'm 15 years old and I just want to work at the ice cream store, twice a week to earn a little bit of extra money, and learn a few skills. Can't do that because all of those lower level jobs are being taken by unskilled immigrants who are coming over. But additionally to that now, the Canadian healthcare system is at its breaking point. You've actually got people, and this was a complaint, almost 10 years ago when I was there, after, my family members were involved in a very serious accident there. This was something that people were telling me then, was that there was a real risk that some people would actually die before they actually got the care they needed. Now, does that sound familiar? Sounds like what we're having here in Australia, right?
It does.
This is the complaint that's happening in the UK. So, I don't know why Keir Starmer's so resistant to hearing this complaint, because it's a similar complaint everywhere that these sorts of things are causing an issue. Now, what the US is saying under Donald Trump, if I'm understanding him correctly, is, look, if you guys aren't going to fix your immigration system, we're not going to allow these people from all over the world to flood into the United States through Canada. So fix shit. And I think that that's what he's sort of getting at. And again, with the ridiculous, absolutely absurd immigration levels that have come into the US during the Biden administration, how is the US supposed to be able to function properly? We've heard about all this. It's been a big issue in the election. The strain it has on social services, the strain it has on housing, the strain it has on education. Well, what do you do when you live in a small rural place and you've got 20 kids in the class, your kids, and there's 20 kids going, in your kids' class, and all of a sudden another 10 kids join that class and none of them can speak English. Of course, that's going to be disruptive.
This is a very real thing, right? And like the reality is, you talk about this and, oh my God, you must be racist, you must be anti-immigration. No, I'm just, I'm pro a fair go for everybody. And I just see, but, I see the country's being culturally changed. I see the financial damage. I see certainly in this country, like you said before. I mean, look, when you have to, the price of rentals is absolutely out of control. People cannot sustain this level of debt. They're pushing themselves into lots and lots of debt. They can't pay for their everyday groceries, all of that. And you've got governments who just seem to want to encourage it instead of doing the right thing and going, okay, we actually know the cause, but the cause has also been, in the case of the Labor Party, very much that they've been importing voters for a very long time. And that's the same when you go to Canada. It's the same with the US with Biden. They've just been importing voters.
Well, let me point out a place where it's sort of the opposite effect, right? So Dubai. Okay. Now, I think Dubai, and look at Singapore, but I'll stick with Dubai for the moment because I know Dubai more than I know Singapore. I think Dubai is amazing. I think that what they've achieved there, Sheikh Mohammed and the other sheikhs and their families should be incredibly proud of what they've built. You have a look at the Dubai airport 30 years ago. There was nothing there, right? And basically, all they did in Dubai was they just hung a shingle on the door and said, a sign on the door and said, hey, you want to build it? Come here. Like, you got some ideas, you got some things, come over here, help us build our country. And that's what they've done. Now, the people that go and live in Dubai, most people don't ever learn Arabic, right? They never really assimilate into Arabic culture. Right. However, the Arabs that are there, they have their own places. Dubai is not the only emirate in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Most of the UAE is still very, very Arab, and a lot of it's much more conservative. Even Abu Dhabi is a lot more conservative than what Dubai is, okay? But you're expected to abide by certain rules. You're expected to abide by certain laws. And you understand when you're there that you're never going to be a local. right? You are a foreigner, and you know it, and you feel it, you know it. What we're hearing in our immigration is, oh, people shouldn't feel that way. Yeah, they should actually. They should, because if you want to do what English-speaking people do, to be fair, what we do when we go around the world, we do tend to, get into our own little cliques, and we have our own little areas, and we sort of stick to those spots. But we know that we don't belong. We don't demand the use of all the other services because we're tourists or we're running a business or whatever, and we pick countries that want us to be there, okay? What we're seeing here is the majority of people are saying, look, we're okay with immigration, but it has to be within limits. We need to see that people are going to become citizens or long-term residents, that they're going to assimilate into our culture, etc. What's wrong with that?
Well, okay, I'm going to throw in the Indian front on this one, but we both can speak on this one. I know a lot of Indian people who have come to Australia, okay, and are working very hard, and they're building up their bank accounts, and they're doing that sort of thing, right? And they're putting their money also, they're basically building wealth so that they can move back to India with it, okay? Now, the long-term changes to Australia, that's not a positive thing because, basically you're kind of pillaging and then taking your wealth back to India. That's a negative thing, right? And also, I don't understand why you'd be so, and it's not just Indians, we're talking about lots of different cultures do this, but I mean, I know a lot of Indians, so it makes a difference for me. I think when you're in a country, I don't know, to your point, okay, are you a guest or are you going to assimilate? I think you've got to make that decision, right?
I actually don't have a problem with that, what you've just described, to be honest with you. If a person's come over here, if they've abided by the rules, if they've paid their taxes and they've contributed, what they've earned, they should get to keep. And, hey, I mean, if you can come to Australia, live here for 10 years, you have some sort of a business, and then you sell your business and you you pay all your taxes, and then you go back home with whatever money you've earned, and then you can live like a king for the next 40 years on what you've earned in 10 years here. Yeah, I am actually okay with that. I don't think that's problematic. But that's me personally. But then again, look, I'm one of those global elites that everyone doesn't like, right? So, because I do travel around the world, I do make money from different countries.
But if I pack up and move to Asia, right? Okay, then I'm not going to go to Asia and go to a country and say, okay, well now I'm here, so you all need to be Australian, and all need to sort of act that way, right? I want to immerse myself and become in that culture as much as I possibly can, right? And I'm not having a go at Indians specifically because I'm 100% on your point. I do agree with you. They've got every right to come to Australia and do what they are. But I just find it sad that a lot of people from different nations are coming to Australia and they're just basically leaving, and they're not benefiting the culture and not enjoying Australian culture while they're here.
As Australians, any different though? FIFO lifestyle. FIFO lifestyle is basically go up, fly, and we'll get what we can out of the mining industry. And we'll only do it for 4 or 5 years, and they'll give you. The trap is though that they get used to that lifestyle, and they don't actually break out and return out of that, come out of that system and put money away. Their toys get bigger, their debts get bigger, their houses get bigger. And that's a trap.
It is.
So, I hear what you say, but is that actually what's happening? Do they actually go back with that fortune? Maybe a handful.
Right.
Well, let's get to that.
I'm talking about, but maybe talk about the ones that because I know they're smart and they're smart people and they're doing the right thing. Maybe that's just, I'm looking at a very specific demographic.
Let's focus on that point a little bit though, right? So let's just take me, for example. Now, I'm not Indian by like first generation, so we're like, I don't know, 200 years or so. I don't even know. I have no idea how many generations ago we're Indian because we were taken by the British to Fiji. So, so I don't know how far back that goes, but I have said a lot on all of our shows, and everybody knows I don't live here anymore, right? So have I been somebody who has, had the benefit of an Australian education or a part Australian education and the benefit of Australian experience and all the rest of it, and then I've taken my knowledge and left instead of contributing? Look, you could make that argument. I was actually having this conversation with a good friend of ours recently, but the flip side of it is that I can't do anything here. There's so many rules and regulations. I can't do anything. I can't get ahead here, right? I mean, I can now because I've got more behind me, but I made a lot of money while I was overseas. I didn't make it from here.
You started. There's no doubt.
So, yeah. So then, well, what do you do? So then I go somewhere else. And then I remember when I had this conversation when I first got to Switzerland, I was sitting there and I was talking to, to my investment banker guy, my contact over there. And what I didn't know was that somebody at the table that was sitting with us was actually a government liaison officer, right? For lack of a description. And something came up about, well, where are you planning on living? Now, this is before Brexit. This is before COVID and all of that. And I said, well, I'm going to be flying to Monaco after I leave here. They said, oh, okay, well, you're visiting Monaco. I said, well, I've got to live somewhere. And I was thinking about living there. And they looked at me and they said, well, what are you going there for? Stay here in Switzerland. And I said, well, like taxes and this and that. Anyway, the bottom line was that, yes, I would have to pay some taxes if I lived in Switzerland, right, which is going to be higher than the 0% that I'd pay if I was living in Monaco. And the guy looks at me and he goes, look, we'll roll out the red carpet for you. We want you. You're very talented. You know what you're doing. We want somebody like you here. We want you here. What do we need to do to get you here? You're going to have to pay some taxes, but look at everything we're doing for you. And I thought about that really long and hard. I actually thought about that on the plane, and I thought, you know what? I can't justify living in Monaco whilst doing business in Switzerland, because he's absolutely correct. Switzerland has actually created the opportunity for me, and I've been able to make money. And I actually think it would be wrong of me not to pay some level of taxation to Switzerland. And so that was my plan. Now, Brexit's obviously interfered with that plan, but that was my plan and still is my plan to move back to Switzerland. So it's not just about not paying taxes at all. And taxes aren't the only issue. But when we have an Australian government that keeps stopping people from wanting to do anything, unless you're a big corporation, why should we stay? You talk about people coming over and earning a lot of money and then going overseas. As you just said, with all these big mining companies, the shareholders are all big overseas companies. How many of those big private equity companies like BlackRock, Blackstone, KKR, all these other groups, what percentage of Australia, Vanguard, what percentage of Australian shares do these guys own? I mean, I feel like, unfortunately, Australians, in my opinion, earn a bit of money, make some money here, put your house out for rent, and then go and live in Thailand. Go and live in Cambodia or Vietnam or the Philippines or whatever. Why bother staying here? Go somewhere else where you're treated better. You got more freedom, lower costs of living. You can keep more of your money. Why not? Clearly, that's what the Australian government is trying to set up. So just do that.
Sadly, I agree with you. That's exactly the situation that's been created right here. I just want, I like the idea. Maybe I'm an idealist, but when people come to a country, I want them to contribute and actually build, integrate with society, integrate with the culture, but enhance the culture. That's all I'm sort of saying. And this idea, and the FIFO was a really good example, mate, because it's not even about people from different countries. It's just a case of, back in the day, there wasn't FIFO, and there was all these country towns, and the country towns would thrive because the people would go there and the communities would grow and lots of things. So I guess that's where I'm going on that. I want to see that side of things happen more.
The reality is, with both of these arguments, though, people want family and friends, and they want connection. It's not just all about making a buck and having a nice lifestyle. People want emotional connection, and I think that's why the FIFO, to get the people on the mines, work. Well, we can't expect their families to move. Well, they're more likely to work for us if their families can stay in their own communities, and they come in and out that via the airplane. Same with going overseas. I think it's the family connection, when it's not all about economics and money. There is wealth is more than just money in the bank account. It's about also relationships. So it's a delicate one to walk through on that.
Yep. Okay.
I know a lot of people that did FIFO and they were living in Thailand, and they would pay for their own flights to come back and forth between Australia and Thailand, and then they'd get their flight from Perth to wherever they were going. But just talk about Asia again. I've got an older friend of mine who he was in a bit of an accident, and he's lost his front handful of teeth.
Right.
It's going to cost him nearly $30,000 to get that done here.
Yeah.
He'd get it done in Indonesia for less than $5,000, including his flights, including his accommodation, and let's just tack on an extra couple of weeks of holiday while he's at it for under $5,000, right? And it makes me just sort of say I can see how hard it is for so many people The older people of Australia who are being left behind, who are having to choose between, feeding their pets or themselves, or having to skip meals and all that sort of stuff, who, sit there with in the middle of the winter rugged up with hot water bottles because they're freezing cold, because they're too scared to put the heater on because they can't afford it. And you go, you know what, how much is your pension? Are you getting $1,000 a fortnight for your pension? Maybe you've got a small superannuation fund or something, 50, 100 grand. You know what? Go to Indonesia, go to Thailand, go somewhere like that where you can live like an absolute king. You can be weighted on hand and foot. You get treated amazingly. Why bother staying here? I say to young people, you know what? It's too hard to get into the property market here. Have you tried going somewhere else? Because at the end of the day, I hate to say, a lot of people have a go at me for this. They say, geez, Shaq, could you be a bit more positive about the place? Could you be a little bit more patriotic? Yeah, I get it. I understand why people would say that. I'm not trying to be negative on Australia, but our government is treating us like shit.
Yeah,
our government is making it so difficult for people to get ahead. Why put up with it? Why put up with it? Just go somewhere else.
It's interesting that you say this, Shaq. Yesterday, the Prime Minister appeared on ABC's Insider program and was quizzed by David Spears on the dropping household disposable income figures, comparing the figures for the United States, Canada, and the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development average. And he showed him a graph and basically said, look, ours is higher than the other nations. Why is that? The Prime Minister basically said, well, you've got to understand the flow-on effect. Inflation hit those countries first, so we're lagging behind. Therefore, our figures are coming down. I actually think it's because we've increased our housing rates and rent and prices to get into a home by letting all these migrants in. This is what the issue is, and I don't think we're skirting around the issue.
Yeah. Well, he's a politician. He's going to skirt around everything, let's face it. The man is incapable of telling the truth, for what I've noticed. That graph is we obviously don't have it on the screen, but it's very, very clear. Okay, it shows the fact that we haven't had the same economic results as the rest of the world. And I do understand, yes, there was a spike earlier, but there's a very distinct difference between what Australia is going through. The housing expenses right now in this country, the cost of living is disgraceful. And a country that we used to call the lucky country for so long, riding on the sheep's back and all of that, and the agricultural side, hang on, we've had successive governments have done everything possible to smash the hell out of those industries, destroy it. We see so much what's going on right now in Western Australia against the live sheep trade, all of that, okay. The agricultural thing is being smashed. The price of goods is going up and up for the everyday Australian. And we are just seeing this massive shift between the haves and have-nots. And that is un-Australian. That is un-Australian. It is not what this country is about. We've just got these elitists who are very, very, very focused on filling their own pockets and also looking good at dinner parties.
Well, I don't want to go on about the haves and the have-nots because that leans towards socialism. And always the left then go, well, let's do taxation to bring that back into balance. And I think that you've got to be careful with that argument. I think it's recognizing how hard is it to get ahead. I think that get back to Shaq's point, as he said earlier, it's easier, there's less red tape overseas to actually accomplish that wealth. And once you do that, to actually keep it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big challenge here.
Great comments coming.
Somebody said to me the other day, you guys can probably guess who it is, but I'm not going to confirm or deny. So somebody said to me the other day, Shaq, you go overseas, you make some money, you come back here, you get a few assets, and you sort of leave. Like, would you come back? And I said, well, it's like having, it's like being in a relationship, and she becomes like fat and ugly and overbearing and just a complete bitch, right? And so then you decide, well, look, I'll go somewhere else. I'll date a different girl. So you date a different girl. You're really happy. She gives you everything you want, right? And you run into your ex, and your ex is, growing her hair a bit longer, and she's looking a bit more trim. She's like, oh, let's get back together. Like, nah, I'm good over here. Thank you very much. Now, I know I'm being a bit silly, but, I think for people that find themselves struggling here so much, depending on where you are, look, save 20 grand, save 50 grand, I don't know, something, and then go somewhere else and then see how you get on, because you will find, especially if you can start an online business or something like that, life is so much better in so many other places where there's a lower cost of living. So many places where you can, even high cost of living places where you can actually live really, really well, rather than having to put up with the crap we put up with here. And the comment that we've got on the screen at the moment, like, yeah, you can use your super to buy an investment property, but you can't live in it.
I know. Crazy. Absolutely. I'm just so glad that comment came through. Appreciate that very much. What are your thoughts on the super situation there?
I think you got to recognise the difference between your own personal residence versus an investment property. It's a different mindset.
Of course.
Your personal residence, you're always, is an emotional decision to a huge extent. You got to be happy with the neighbourhood. You know, if you're going to have a family, you're thinking about your kid, where they're going to go to school. Are you close to mum and dad? You know, do you like the colour of the house, the rooms function, all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's people, I've heard real estate agents say, people won't buy a house because their dining room table won't fit in it. And I'm kind of thinking, well, just get another table. You know what I mean? But that's how emotionally attached people become to those kind of decisions. So I can understand why there's a different mindset in recognising that superannuation is building the retirement thing, as opposed to that. But I think it's a fair question given how high the cost of getting into the rental market is, or the property market is for people at the moment. So I can understand why that question comes up. I think the difficulty, the thing that most people get annoyed about with superannuation is the goalposts are always changing.
Constantly.
They're always fiddling with that. I had a conversation with a financial planner recently on that, and they're saying, look, you know, given that, it's a great avenue to store up wealth and that sort of thing. I think in the last 4 years, we've kind of become a little bit more conscious as who has the control, custodianship of our wealth. And if the goalposts are always changing on an asset you can't access until you retire, it kind of gives that bit of uncertainty in the market going, well, is it really mine? And given that a lot of government workers can't roll their funds into a self-managed super fund because it's not actually there. It's just an accounting notation in the book. I think that makes it even harder to have control of that wealth.
Oh, that's right. I mean, look, how superannuation is now compared to when it was first introduced, it's just a completely different product in every sort of way. Another great comment's come up here. The last 4 houses sales near my place have been brought by investment funds. This annoys the hell out of me. Venture capitalists, particularly in the eastern states, I get it. I can see it from both sides. But, okay, when that happens, you're artificially pumping up the market over here and pushing so many people out. My big concern is these guys are eating up supply and using our money. It is 100% accurate. That's the problem. I was speaking to some people just a few days ago, maybe a week, living in a working class suburb here in Perth. Okay, with just a very irregular, nice place, but nothing spectacular. $900 per week, right? Okay, I'm sorry, but a 4x1 is not $900 a week.
Yeah.
It's insane.
I don't want to jump to their defense. I think I don't necessarily think that they're pushing up the prices, right? They're buying the assets because they can see that there's going to be heightened demand for it. But yes, that does dry up supply. That's the government's fault, though, because the government can do more land releases. The big issue that I think causes this is the unequal treatment, because the investment funds get a whole heap of tax deductions, right? So it becomes more attractive for them and a tax enhanced investment for them. Whereas you sitting at home trying to, you sit there with your partner going, look, if we save up 50 grand and we can put a house deposit on Keystart and then try and get a loan or whatever, right? But you can't earn more than 70,000 a year. I mean, all these ridiculous rules they've got on, right? But let's just say that you are able to get into your first home. You don't get all of that special tax treatment. In fact, these days you'd be better off, and I'm certainly not suggesting this because I think that everybody benefits from the sense of security when you actually own your own home. But these days, you'd be better off buying investment properties and renting the house that you want to live in.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
when you look at the maths on it, if you go and rent a house that's worth, $2 or $3 million, you might be paying $1,000, $1,500 a week in rent, right? If you go and buy a place that's worth $500,000 to $800,000, you'll be paying between sort of $500 to $800 a week in rent. That's not even going to be enough to meet the interest payments. So you might as well go and buy investment properties where you can get a higher yield, and that will add to your income, and then use that extra income you've got to go and rent a place that you want to live in. And that is the real tragedy of it. But then I sort of come back to saying what I was saying before. If you're going to do that, then go buy up those investment properties. And when you go rent your own house, go rent it in Vietnam.
Let's shift gears for a minute. Yeah. You often hear about the Rothschilds, and it's often people go, "Oh, that's conspiracy theory," and all this sort of stuff. In that, yeah. I'd heard about them, and when I initially,
rent your house from someone and then rent a room back off them. That's the way to do it.
That is brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
That's great. You often think, you hear about this mysterious family and this sort of stuff, and are they real? I remember when I came across a client when I was working in the high-end law, accounting, financial planning firms, one individual had come across and worked for some of the Rothschilds, and hearing their stories was quite interesting. Or they had not working for them, but they were in that environment, had seen them and observed them and this sort of stuff. And so you start hearing these kind of, okay, they're actually real, Then when the mainstream media start reporting on it, you go, well, hang on a second, this is really interesting. Have a listen to this story that's come out over the weekend. All right. Let's hit the mainstream.
Hollywood Hills, and tonight we're learning about the man with a very famous last name who lived and died there.
Firefighters had a difficult time accessing this home because it's set so far back off the road, and it's at the top of a very steep hill with a very thin stairwell leading up there. Once they did access the home, they made the tragic discovery inside. Hollywood Hills neighbors did everything they could to put out this raging fire that broke out at a home on Lookout Mountain Avenue.
I was going up the stairs, and right as I approached the top of the stairs, the flames burst out of the house.
Firefighters knocked down the flames in about 20 minutes, but found the home's elderly occupant dead inside. Neighbors identifying him as Will Rothschild of...
The point is that media is changing. It's now talking about this mysterious family. That have hidden behind the scenes and have not wanted publicity, haven't wanted to be in the limelight. And that leaning towards secrecy kind of fuels the fire, no pun intended, a bit more in terms of curiosity, like, well, what's going on here? What's actually happening? And then you hear about these kind of stories where they are hitting the mainstream. My point is this, things are changing.
Yeah, they are.
Whether it be in the media reporting or actually in the financial system, we are seeing this change of the guard. We're seeing wealth shift. I've been talking for many, many times. We are in the middle of a wealth shift. So it's interesting that this stuff is coming out.
I agree. What do you think of this comments come up? Rothschild, as per Balfour Declaration, created the state of Israel. I've never heard that comment before. What do you guys, do you have any information there? Or not?
I haven't researched it in depth. I have come across that.
Okay.
In relation to that, there's a lot of talk about how these families were involved with the Zionists and creating a state for them.
Okay.
And they're different from the Jewish people and are often confused. There are reports about that. I'm not an expert on that corner and side of things. So
I understand. I certainly know nothing about that sort of stuff. So I'll even be good and keep my opinions to myself. But a man who can't do that, well, there's Shaq.
Yeah, look, I'll say a couple of things here. First of all, from what I've heard about that Rothschild, it was an older guy. It sounds like he was already dead and then the fire erupted. I hope that's the case, because I would hate for somebody to be burned alive. As for the Rothschild family themselves, look, they're a big old name like the Medici family. I think if we look back at history over hundreds of years or longer and try to judge what families did to make their money, perhaps we shouldn't do that. I'll say that there are wealthier Rothschilds and less wealthy Rothschilds around the world, and you do sometimes see them pop up in the press. One of the things that they're criticised a lot for is being this sort of banking and financial family, right? And Rothschild actually comes from where they lived. There was a red shield, and they used that to become their name. So Red Rothschild Shield. So that's how that surname came about. Look, there was a time in history where lending money or being involved in the money business at all was dirty, and the Jewish people weren't allowed to do anything other than the dirty work. And so that's what made some families like them quite, big in the financial world. I personally don't think that they would have the sort of power and influence that they used to have. I think it's just because of the legend of their surname. I actually think that there's a lot of other things that we need to worry about with the big corporations getting together and trying to manipulate the system for themselves. But look, I'm not going to jump to the defense of the Rothschilds. I'm just going to say I would probably err on the side of caution of saying, well, they've got this legendary surname, so they must all be, this secret cabal of world, puppeteers. I think that that's probably not going to be accurate.
I look at the positives of what you've just said, though, as far as Derek, that years ago this would have just happened. It would have been very quiet. It wouldn't have been mentioned. And the changing face of media, the fact that now we get a lot of honesty and integrity in media, certainly not from the mainstream, but because of the whole face of it changing, that's why stories like this are actually coming to the fore.
That's my whole point. It's more of an acknowledgement of fact of what's occurred rather than of saying is it great or not. I don't think it's great by anyone's. Anybody losing their home, and I know someone who has lost their home to fire.
Yes.
it's not a pleasant thing, not something I'm wishing on anyone at all. What I'm trying to say here, my point is that isn't it interesting that a story that has been kind of on the fringe of narratives in society is now starting to enter into the mainstream. And I think we're in the age of revelation where we're getting more and more facts coming out, stories of what's really going on. It's part of this narrative. It's part of this process.
Agreed. All right, let's end on that. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the Greater Wealth. If you would like to have some more information, though, on actually creating some wealth for yourself, education is the key, and this is the man to go and talk to. See right there on the bottom of the screen there, it is Blu Sky Factory. Get on board, bluskyfactory.com. There is no E in the Blu Sky Factory, but .com.au.
I think he should change the name, though, because Blue's associated with the Democrats. Maybe we should call it Red Sky Factory or something from here on in.
Oh, dear. No, let's not do that. Mate, love it, absolutely love it. Thank you very much for being part of Save the Greater Wealth. It's Edge Radio Australia.